Hello students and welcome to SOC212 Gender and Society. It's great to be here with you all. I am your professor Justine Hecht, and this week we're jumping into reproductive justice and Roe versus Wade, the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Before we do that though, I just want to remind you that your explanatory analyses are due in a few weeks here. And your first one is looking at the who, what, when, where, and why of the movement that you're studying, or of the gender issue you're studying. And the second one is responding to one of the research questions that you proposed for your gender justice issue. Both require to use a theoretical framework that we've studied this semester. So each module is a theoretical framework. We are exploring a theoretical framework in each module. One of them might be gender scripts. The other might be the social construction of gender, masculinities. What else? Patriarchy, right? Intersectionality, all those kind of different things. Reproductive labor, so on and so forth. Which of those frameworks do you find best helps you explain your topic, right? The why of your topic. Which theoretical framework best helps you respond to your gender issue? Okay, right? That's how you use the theoretical frameworks. The other key here is that when you are doing your explanatory write-ups or analyses, I'm not looking for a summary of your sources. That's the last thing I want. The summary was already in the annotated bibliography. You did that, right? So now your goal is to synthesize your sources, to take your sources and put them together to create a whole. And that's what synthesis is, just bringing things together in a way that forms a whole. How do your sources speak to each other? What are the relationships between these sources? What new information do we learn when we look at these sources together that we may not have seen if we looked at them apart? All right, and so this is an example from my SOC241 race and ethnicity class where we create a racial justice database where we look at racial justice movements historically and create a space where anybody can come learn about those on the internet. Work in progress. So, and so this is an example of me synthesizing two different sources. The bold down here is the synthesis. This is me setting up the synthesis with the quotes up here. So it says, it has been found that there is no scientific definition of race, and that the construction of race has a lot more to do with power than it does biology. So that's one source that I'm quoting from BBC Ideas. Now I move it to the next source. Ta-Nehisi Coates discusses this when describing an experience with his son at a movie theater. His son, who was 5, was walking slowly, and a white woman pushed him, saying, "Come on," as if to hurry up the child. Coates responded, as any protective parent would, telling the woman not to push his son. I got a lot of typos here, sorry. At this point, a white man stepped in and said, "I can have you arrested." This illustrates the workings of race and power in that the black identity of Coates and his son meant that they did not have the right to defend themselves, but the white racial identity of this woman and the man who responded provided them with the power to enforce their rights to public space with police if necessary, right? And so what you see here is that Coates didn't say anything about this. He didn't make any kind of indication about this. Neither did this idea that there's no scientific definition of race and that it has more to do with power than it does biology. But what I was able to do is to illustrate how race has more to do with power than biology by bringing these two sources together. Right, and so that's what you might do as you're working on your theoretical, you're engaging your theoretical frameworks, right? So in this case, this is a theoretical framework. Scientific, race does not have a basis in biology. It has to do with power. And so now I'm applying that idea to this experience with Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is a black man with his son, to make this particular argument, okay? This takes practice. If you're new to doing it, you might be messy at first. That's okay. That's why you're in school, to learn how to do this kind of stuff, right? So just do your best with it. See what it looks like for you to try to bring at least two sources together to synthesize your research and to create your argument is really what synthesis is you're creating your argument. This is going to be particularly helpful for the second analysis, okay? So that's all I want to say about that, because I do want to move through all of this pretty quickly because I want to get to the end, which is where we start to think about how the abortion ban impacts our understanding of gender and sexuality as well. And of course, the experiences that people will have when they're not able to access abortion. So here we went through like the history. We already did a little bit of this in the previous modules. But just a reminder, from 1776 to about 1873-ish, give or take, kind of depending on which state you're looking at, abortion rights were left to individual states. It was basically understood that abortion was morally okay before the quickening, which was when you could start to feel the baby kick inside the birthing person. And if you could start to feel the baby kick, then it was pretty much, well, morally established that you likely were not going to pursue an abortion unless there was some medical necessity, right? Save the life of the mother, something like this. That doesn't mean they didn't happen. They certainly did, when you could access like a midwife, right? But it was morally understood that post-quickening, we're not going to do abortion. And that was just the common sense of that particular time. And then from the 1900s on, abortion is a felony in most states. Very few exceptions. Sometimes the life of the mother or rape and incest would be included as exceptions. And then in 1973, we have Roe versus Wade, which establishes the federal protection for abortion rights in the United States. It's rooted on the 14th Amendment, which was passed after the abolition of slavery to ensure equal rights for all people within the United States. This is the same precedent that set the stage for affirmative action, so making sure that we are kind of doing like reparations, right? When we're doing like college admissions, most colleges denied entrance to Black people. And so affirmative action is a tool that we can use to ensure that we're not replicating that same process. This is also the precedent that used to justify same-sex marriage. And there's a lot of conversation right now about whether or not the overturning of Roe v. Wade leads us into a space to overturn both of these, which the Supreme Court did just recently overturn affirmative action as well. And so we're a little concerned about what's going on with same-sex marriage, okay? So just so you kind of see that these issues are not different, they're connected, right? And we need to understand a little bit too about the experiences of people who could birth when they were trying to access an abortion during the times of illegal abortion. So I have a few stories for you here. You'll learn more about these, but you can see some of the extremes that people had to go through, right? And the fact that some people actually, watched their people they care about die in their arms. This is not an uncommon story, unfortunately, because they received a botched abortion, right? So we really start to understand that this issue, is not just about, what your ideology might be, but it's about people's lives, right? And so I want to introduce you to Loretta Ross. She had an abortion in the 1970s. She's now a leading scholar and activist for reproductive justice. What's great too is that she teaches at a university, but she never received more than her bachelor's degree. And what allows her to teach at a university or maybe a state college, either one, what allows her to do that is all of the work that she's done for reproductive justice counts because she's done so much and she's put forth so much scholarship about reproductive justice. So you'll be able to access this on Canvas and you can read her story about what led her to get to an abortion and how that starts to inform why she becomes a reproductive justice activist as well. This too I'm not going to show. It's a little film clip. You'll have access to it on Canvas in the learning modules. This is the Jane Collective. In the 1960s, the Jane Collective took it upon themselves to learn how to do medical abortions so that people who birthed could get an abortion still. And so we call this direct action. Rather than just waiting for the laws to change or, continuing to pressure your elected officials to make the laws change, the Jane Collective took it upon themselves to learn what they needed to learn to help birthing people exactly when they needed it. Because if you need an abortion, you can't wait for the law to change, right? You have to figure out a way to get that abortion now. And so many folks would go to dangerous places to get abortions because there were no other options. And so the Jane Collective wanted to create a safe space that was run by women, because it was mostly women. I do need to learn more about the trans history here. I know it's there, but the Jane Collective in particular focused on women, cis women. And what's my point about that? Oh, yes. And so it was a way for the people who were directly, put it this way, that's a better way to put it. The people who were directly impacted by the ban on abortion were the people who were organizing to take direct action to make sure that people who could birth could have access to safe abortions. Okay. So you'll have a question about them on the discussion board. pathway. So this is kind of some of the different framings that occurred that begin to lead to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I'm going to rush through this because I want to get, there's other stuff here I want to get to, and you can look at all of this. So you don't need me to tell you about it, right? Because it's right here. So you can see yes, and so this right here is the decision that justified Roe v. Wade and providing federal protections for abortion rights across the country. This is the National Life Committee. They were an organization that was against abortion. And where this idea of right to life comes from, right? And so if you say, I am pro-life, that means that the people that you are against must be anti-life, right? This is called interpolation. Here's another theoretical framework you can use, right? By framing the movement against abortion as the right to life, it kind of creates an individual identity for the fetus, and the opponents have to argue why they are not against life. And so you're essentially, when this happens, it's like you're essentially forcing the other party to respond to your argument. You have control over the narrative, and now everybody else has to kind of filter through that narrative, even if that's not what we're actually saying here, right? Because the pro-choice movement is not just about pro-choice, it's of course about pro-life, because it's the choice to live a life based in bodily autonomy, right? So these are different ways of thinking through this particular issue. You'll have access to this video on Operation Rescue. This is an anti-abortion organization that engaged in a lot of violent actions, such as like blowing up clinics, bombing clinics, targeting doctors, abortion doctors, so on and so forth. They've been organizing for a long time to overturn Roe, and it's a lot of this type of work from organizations like Operation Rescue that lead us to where we are today. So you can learn a little bit more about the Hyde Amendment and the impacts of Planned Parenthood with Casey. And here is where we get to the Dobbs versus Jackson the Jackson Women's Health Organization Supreme Court case of 2022, which overturned Roe versus Wade. And so this is kind of the process that it went to. It started with this 2018 HB 1510 Gestational Act that would have banned abortion after 15 weeks. This went through a series of court decisions before making it up to the Supreme Court, where it was found to be justified. And that is what then goes to overturn Roe versus Wade. Judge Amy Coney Bryant says that the obligation of motherhood no longer flows from pregnancy. And so the argument she's making here is that because women work outside of the home, because we work outside of the home, because we have access to childcare, because we have public education, so on and so forth, then being a mother, it doesn't relate to pregnancy anymore. That's the argument being made, okay? The obligation of motherhood no longer flows from pregnancy. You can have a baby, and then you can go to childcare, right? You don't have to, you're not fully responsible for that child anymore, which is something we want to think about. Childcare costs in the United States are extremely high. Wages are not. And so is that true necessarily, right? This is the majority opinion, argues that we now have laws that protect equal opportunity, prohibitions on sex and pregnancy discrimination, financial support is available to offset childcare, and safe haven laws make adoption a viable alternative. This is the idea that women can have it all, both in motherhood and career, because of these supports, potentially, right? But what we also see here is that there is a conflation of gender and biology, right? We've been talking about gender as socially constructed, and what Barrett is getting at here is this idea that gender has to do with one's biology. And so when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about how gender is a system that shapes social order. Within that system, it's a binary. There's only boys and there's only girls. There cannot be anybody else. There cannot be trans people. There cannot be gender non-binary people, so on and so forth. Right? And you can see here, right, motherhood or womanhood is connected with being maternal and caring and attracted to masculine boys, whereas being a male is associated with asserting boundaries, right? Being attracted to girls, feminine girls, and being sexually powerful. right? And so what we start to see here is that it's not just not just women, right, but trans people who have to deal with this as well. So the issues that we're looking at are bodily autonomy and self-determination, gender-neutral affirming language, sexuality, and trauma-informed abortion care.